morning. Everybody here for a great day, great opportunity to listen and learn and talk and discuss. But yes, oh, that's the kind of response. You know, did you guys not have your coffee this morning? So, did everyone get a copy of the agenda? Does everybody have an agenda? Okay. You will notice something. Probably the most astute observers will notice that I'm not Jeff Weiss. Jeff offers his apologies. He had a family emergency situation where he couldn't travel this week. However, he is joining us on the webcast, and I know he's out there right now. So, along with many other people on the webcast, hey, Jeff, we have cookies. Thanks to our friends at Marathon, Craig Pearson and Sean. They brought cookies today, so you found them all on your seats. They are celebrating 811 as National Dig Safe Month. So thank you to them for sharing. You know, I thought it was appropriate to start up with a slide that reminds us of this very important effort. You know, it's part of a larger whole to move safety to the next level. We believe that when we look ways of improving safety, of improving an already excellent or very good safety record, we might have to move to different areas and think about new ways of achieving it. The industry and regulators and members of the public have offered good ideas. And I think what you'll see is when we go through some of the discussion today, that we're learning from others. And you're going to hear recurrent themes throughout the day. We're learning, continual improvement. And Ron's going to touch on some of that here in just a few minutes. But I have some housekeeping issues that I need to go through, just our safety stuff. I would mention that we have, you can see how many people are here today, but I would tell you that you're outnumbered by the number of people that are joining us on the webcast. We are seeing an increasing trend of people that, because of tight budgets, can't travel and be here in person, but they are joining us. And so what we do is we have a webcast, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining us, that allows people to participate. And we also will be recording this webcast so that people that aren't available today can come back in at a later time and watch the entire day or portions thereof. So thank you all for joining us. As we kick off, I want to put off a very important reminder. You're going to hear a number of speakers today, and they're going to cover a lot of topics. And you're going to have questions that are going to go through your mind. Please write them down. Please speak up and voice those questions, because you may have the same question other people have, and people are always hesitant to bring them out. But we need to hear those questions and discuss them. We're going to have a Q&A session around 11 of the committee that helped develop 1173, and then we're going to have another Q&A session later in the day of executives who have fit tested SMS systems and can tell you their experience, but they'll be open game too to answer questions. So think about those things. And folks on the webcast, you'll notice that on the screen, I guess I should do it over here, there's a place where you can register your questions. Those will come in to someone sitting here in the room, and they will write them down and bring them to us. So as you go through the day, don't wait till the Q&A session. As you go through the day and hear different people, write down your questions, think about it, or submit them on the webcast. This is the third in 3 workshops relating to safety management systems. The first one, which is all these are available on the web if you want to go back and look at pieces of them or all of it. The first one was about, why is this a good idea? What is the experience in other industries? And it has, SMS has had a very proven record of improving safety. And we learned from those other industries. And Ron, I'm sure will talk about that, how we built off of other people's learnings. The second one talked about the basic concepts of 1173. And today we're going to talk about taking it through the home stretch, right to publication. Safety moment really quick. I think everybody knows as you came in, exit doors are here, and you can go down and get to the fire exit. Restrooms right out the door and to the left. The other issue, if in the very unlikely event we are to have any type of a security issue, we will be working with the building security. So just be patient if we have to address any of those issues. All presentations today will be made available within 1 to 2 weeks. That's our target. The video will be available on YouTube, as are the other ones. As a courtesy, can everyone please put their cell phones on vibrate or silence or stun or something like that? You know, I thought about suggesting that whose phone rings today gets to buy lunch at the speaker they interrupt. Do you think that would be a good incentive? Someone might actually use that because if they wanted to talk to someone. But there should be a lunch guide available at the registration table, so when we break for lunch, we have a long time for lunch. We built that in, but there are a lot of restaurants really close here in the mall and around the area. So our purpose today, we're going to talk about the origins of SMS to some degree and how we arrived at the standard we have. We're going to talk about the parts of SMS we're going forward with, and we're going to talk about how we take it to implementation, and we'll do that through some Q's and A's, and also, as I encouraged you earlier, you know, the Q&A session with the executives I think will be particularly valuable as we learn how these executives are implementing it and embracing it throughout their company. Agenda, you should have this already. If not, we do have copies, I believe, that we can provide. Everyone is probably familiar with this. It's kind of ingrained in my memory. I've actually had dreams about this, Ron. So this is, the only problem was it was one of those nightmares I had about an order. So it's one of those things you deal with so long, and it should be ingrained in all of our activities and the various things we do. The plan, do, check, act cycle. The last thing, I think this is my last slide before I turn it over to Ron. Why are we doing this? You know, we had a number of serious incidents, and I think we can all agree that although the safety trends for serious incidents are getting better, we still have a ways to go. We're not done yet. We believe that this standard can help take us to the next level. If our goal is 0, this can help us get there. The other thing that's interesting is that the 1173 committee was very diverse. We had various stakeholders representing the public, representing regulators, state and federal, representing the different industry, liquid, gas, you know, AGA, INGA. We had a lot of different people that came together with very different thoughts and very different ideas. And I think it would be fair to say that our first few meetings were a little bit rocky. It was interesting, but by the end, you know, here, how long has it been? Two years?
A little over 2 years.
A little over 2 years. We have a common goal, and we are in incredible harmony as far as what we have resolved. And so I think we've got a good product to deliver, and I think it will serve us very well as we move forward. So with that, let me introduce Ron McLean. He was the chair of our committee. And I have to admit, I have quite an admiration for Ron, watching him work through some of these issues and some very controversial issues, and he never lost his cool. You know, others did, including myself, but he never did, so compliments to you. Ron McLean is the president of Kinder Morgan Energy Partners Products Pipeline. So with that, Ron. You can use this, or
Okay.
you can use it down there.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Linda. You know, this has been quite a journey, and as we talk about SMS, you'll hear that it's a journey as well. We had a lot of leadership. I had the privilege to chair the committee, but tremendous leadership really from every member. And I'll put up those who participated on the committee in a few minutes, but there were a few that, at the risk of, well, I don't think I could offend anyone on the committee because we'll get to them in a minute, but there were a few who really went above and beyond in the leadership of helping with this. And Jeff Weiss, I really regret he can't be here today, but very passionate about this. At times, he had to be pragmatic because there were a lot of industry. In fact, that wasn't the nature of anyone on the committee to be pragmatic. We argued for the points we wanted to see, but Jeff, tremendous leadership, and Linda as well. Thank you for the passion they did. I also want to appreciate Peter Lidiak, of API, who did a tremendous job of coordinating what was essentially an API task. And I'll touch on that in a minute. Mark Harith, our technical writer and resource with PPIC, just tremendous help in taking a jumble of thoughts, sometimes from meetings, and then writing them down and rerouting them. Thank you very much, Mark. And then Stacy Gerard, she's retired from PHMSA, but she had the task of representing the public. And she did a really good job, and she's very passionate and always came prepared with thoughtful ideas. So those were, I'm just going to note as notable leadership efforts, even though everyone on the committee really did engage in leadership at times. These are the things I want to touch on today. Systematic management, we'll talk about what that means, and the plan, do, check, act circle. Just leadership in general, employee engagement, continuous improvement, a maturity curve, which it may be one of the hardest things about implementation of this. And then at the end, I want to touch on how I believe operators can get a start, whether you're highly evolved with management systems or starting from scratch. As we came together, as Linda indicated, pretty chaotic sometimes, and maybe not the right thing to say, but at the end of the day, I needed a drink, and it was really difficult to bring all these different viewpoints together into one. But the prize was improved safety, and I want to really emphasize, this wasn't an academic study or just trying to get another recommended practice on the table, but we felt there was a prize to be had, and it was stakeholder groups represented very broadly, but led by API, and we developed a comprehensive framework, and framework's an important word. It's not a what to do or how to do it, it's kind of what to do, and operators will have to figure out how to do it with detailed and underlying procedures. The product was the RP 1173, and key components, and these are really important, and I'll touch on some others as I go through my presentation, but how top management develops processes to reveal and mitigate safety threats. And I'll just emphasize top management. Sometimes those things are left in the trenches, but top management has to lead and encourage and almost demand quality in these areas. And the standard provides for continuous improvement, more on that in a minute. And we want to make compliance and risk reduction routine. And sometimes it's not routine. You have various levels of compliance, but we want to make 100% compliance a routine activity, and risk reduction routine by taking intentional actions. Here's our committee, and even though I touched on a few at the beginning, everyone on this committee was exactly the right person to have. At some of our earlier meetings, our first task was to identify representatives of stakeholder groups, and this group is very diverse. I have the names with the company they represent, but we had hazardous liquid pipelines represented. We had transmission gas pipelines. We had distribution. We had small gas municipality operators on the system. And we had regulators, state and federal participating. We had trade organizations, INGA, AOPL, AGA, and you can imagine, and then the public, we had 2 representatives for the public. But as you can imagine, this team all brought individual agendas early to the party. And yet it was because in my previous slide I talked about there was a prize out there. The focus on the prize of improved safety let people eventually put aside their agendas and what they wanted and work toward that common goal of improved safety. And I couldn't be prouder. Everyone came to every meeting well prepared. They did their homework. They did their task at the end or before they got there. When we got to the meetings, it wasn't, well, I didn't get to that. I mean, every time people came prepared, and we had discussion that was very pointed, sometimes in opposition, but we found how to get through those topics with what the right answer was. So that common prize was embraced by the team, and they moved from being individuals truly to a team. The process really began, even though I think industry has wrestled with safety management systems for quite a while. The driver that made us get further down the road was after the Marshall and San Bruno incidents. The NTSB made specific recommendations to API, and it was to generate a pipeline-specific safety management system. A lot of other industries had them, and it had good results from safety management, but there was not one written or a standard or an RP yet for pipelines. And so the recommendations are here. I won't go through all of them, but to proactively address safety issues before they become incidents or accidents. Document procedures, treat operator errors as system deficiencies and not as reasons to punish. We spent a lot of time talking about being non-punitive for reporting of risk or other issues, and that's embedded well into the document. Senior management to commit to operational safety. As I work in some fairly senior management levels, I mean, there's a lot going on every day, and unless you act with intentionality on safety and improving procedures and reducing risk, you won't ever get to those things. And so the NTSB recommended, that was one of their main pieces. And so you can go through these yourself, but API was really on, and I think in the end we created a product that really meets all of these. So the RP reaches beyond traditional standards, and I hope all of you have taken time to read it, but it's a little more philosophical than other RPs and standards. Sometimes standards tell you what to do. This RP tells you what to do, but not how to do it. I'll keep re-emphasizing this. You'll have to, and at the end of my presentation, I'll talk about an approach to that. The relationship between safety culture and safety management is, I think, expanded upon more in this document than any I've ever seen. Strong parallels. If you have a positive safety culture, you're likely to be successful with SMS. If you have a strong SMS process, you're likely to build and enhance a positive safety culture. My third bullet here, I think this RP has the potential to greater impact safety than anything else we're working on. Now that's a pretty big statement for me to make, because we're always developing tools and technology for more difficult integrity defects. But I believe, since this overarches all the processes, and if we gain attention throughout organizations on how important it is to act with intentionality to reduce risk, this can move the ball further than any other effort we have. I just really believe that. The RP generates overarching ideas for management and employees to act. And then these ideas have evolved through months of work by the team. Here are the essential safety management system elements. There are 10 of them. We labored from 8 to 15 and ended up with these adequately catching all the important parts. At the top is leadership and management commitment. And there's a lot of leaders here. I was very pleased to see very senior people at this webcast, because without senior leadership within a company, we call it top management in the RP, this won't get very far down the road. The top management has to constantly add energy and momentum to the process, and if just left somewhere else in the organization, it'll probably spin down without the benefits that we think could be there. Stakeholder engagement. Now this is one, like in a lot of processes, end up down near the bottom of the listing. And I'm not going to say these are in a particular order, but I can tell you the first two are in this order for a reason. Leadership and management commitment has to be at the top. We also believe stakeholder engagement is a really important part of a company's safety process. And then you can go through the rest of them. And we actually will expand on each of these elements as we go today. Systematic management. What does it mean to act with intentionality? That word has a lot of depth to it, and Andy Drake at Spectre, I would always talk about making compliance and risk reduction routine. Well, Andy Drake would use the word acting with intentionality. So I've kind of latched onto both of those concepts. But what does it mean to act with intentionality? And I'm going to try to build on that a little bit by telling you what it doesn't mean to act with intentionality. Learning about unmitigated risk when you happen to think about it. Now, when you happen to think about it isn't acting with intentionality. If you want to learn about unmitigated risk with intentionality, you'll set specific times throughout each year that you meet with key leaders over those particular risks. And really, I think the best way to do it is if you have a scheduling system that reminds people, here's their date to do this, they must do it. And if they don't do it, it escalates into the organization until someone insists they have that meeting or risk reduction discussion or whatever it is. And so if you just do it when you think about it, pretty often you're going to be too busy to really think about it. So it's with a purpose. Assessing compliance when you have time. You know, compliance is really important. And sometimes people think that's not too difficult, but I can tell you with very large systems, to stretch for 100% compliance is more difficult than it sounds, because there are so many things going on in an organization, lost records, I mean, different things happened. People thought they did it or they did it and didn't document it. But you need to assess that regularly with teams competent to do that. Here's another one that doesn't mean is engaging external stakeholders when they reach out to you. Well, that's not you acting with intentionality. You should identify who the stakeholders are and reach out to them purposefully. Now, I'm going to clarify. We let the operators determine who the stakeholders are, because there are people who want to be stakeholders who just don't like pipelines. And I'm going to say up front, I don't really care to meet with those people because you can't get to a common ground. But there are many stakeholders out there who really care about safety. And they're concerned about how you're protecting them and how close you are to them. Those stakeholders deserve your attention and communication, and I'll even say demonstration of your metrics for safety. If you occasionally review your emergency response plans, that's not acting with intentionality. Or meeting with your integrity people after you have an accident, that's not acting with intentionality. So if you take some of these negatives I've put out there, you can kind of see what intentionality is. It's building systems and processes that cause these important things to happen regularly, and they're documented, and then periodically they happen again. That's what acting with intentionality is. Linda showed the Plan, Do, Check, Act model. A couple things I want to make on this page. While not a required model, the Plan, Do, Check, Act process is outlined early in the introduction as just one way to approach SMS. And because it's about continuous improvement, it's a circle. You come back to it over and over and over. You plan, you do, you check your results and metrics, and then you act, and then you start planning again. So that's the way it works. A lot of ways to approach SMS implementation, but this is one of them that we go into in the document. And you'll see the 10 elements are kind of on the outer spokes of this Plan, Do, Check, Act wheel. Now, many of these spill over into other quadrants, but we tried to put them where we felt they fit the best. And so in your planning, you're really doing risk management. And then you're doing, you have emergency response, operations, procedures, and controls, and so on. And then you're checking safety assurance, incident investigation, audits. And then your actions are all about continuous improvement, management review, and then you start the process over again. Continuous improvement in system maturity, and I really don't like very much here, but, well, I did have a point here on the bottom of this slide, too. This is actually on page 8 of the RP. The point I want to make is there's only 36 pages to it. The first portion has some boilerplate. The last portion has a lot of credits, but it's not something that takes you a month to read. It's not a thick volume. Now, I'm not going to mislead you. There's a lot in there to think about as you pick apart how do you conform and claim compliance to it. But it's not a long document to get through. And then Continuous improvement, you really want to think about PSMS as a journey, not a destination. And as soon as you think you've reached the destination and finished, a yellow light ought to be flashing in the back of your mind, because you're never finished. You're going to constantly push the limits of safety, compliance, risk reduction, and the prize, which is improved safety. Coincident to continuous improvement is a maturity model. And somehow operators need to measure how well they're moving down this journey. And if you start today, in a year you're at the same place you were, or in 3 years you're at the same place you were, you're really not maturing in this process. And so there's a section on how do you set up measurements for your maturity in implementation and pushing your own procedures to comply with all of this. And this is really important. While operators should seek to gain conformance with a sense of urgency, and I say that because you don't really get the prize in your hand if you don't go after this with a sense of urgency, but it may take years to reach what you consider significant maturity. So as it matures, it's going to be constantly assessed and improved. And so it's a journey to undertake with a sense of urgency, but it is a journey that could take years to have significant and widespread maturity. Here's some elements of maturity, and the first few bullets I'll note. You want to have ways to measure that your safety management system is comprehensively applied. And that means system-wide. If it's just in a few pockets but not well embedded in your culture, that's not a mature model. Systematically applied. Is it applied in a uniform, consistent way? And then is it integrated? And how well does it use the experiences of employees? And how well does it use data across your system? And then here's some bullets for an operator in the early stages. And it's 4 simple steps to begin testing how you're moving and how you're maturing along this journey that I've talked about. Where do I start? Now, at Kinder Morgan, and we'll have our CEO speak to it in one of the latter panels today on how important it is, but I think we have a bit of a head start, but it came from the School of Hard Knocks back in 03, 04. We were on a pretty rocky path of performance. And it wasn't that we didn't have good people, we just didn't have the focus to get to where we wanted to be. And we overcame a lot of that by throwing millions of dollars at it. Well, that's not a sustainable process. So if you can imagine, you can dig yourself out of a hole with urgent efforts and millions of dollars. But about 2007, as we made progress to get out of our hole that we were operating in, our CEO, actually, he was president at the time for overall Kinder Morgan, he thought we needed to develop a process or a safety management system. And it's the only way to have sustainable success. Now, you'll still have things happen that weren't foreseeable or you couldn't reasonably have known about. But it begins a process of learning what's important. So our intent was to provide a framework that's scalable for large and small operators. This makes the standard more important to be a what to do and not how to do it, because the hows will be different if you're a small or a large operator. And we also wanted it to fit operators with highly evolved management systems or those who might start from scratch. We certainly did not want to write something that took somebody already well down the path and back them up to square one. So this practice was written with all of those things in mind and intended to be a framework. And so here's what I recommend if you really want to get either further down the road or start from scratch with a personalized operator safety management system. And I would first say read the practice several times. If you just read it and as your first pass you're trying to make notes what you should do, I don't think you'll come away with the appropriate understanding of what's trying to be done. So read it a few times, think about it, and gain what the overall intent of the document is first before you start picking out the individual requirements. And then, after you've read it a few times, list your perception of the explicit requirements. And there are explicit requirements in this document. It's in the center of the introduction and the credits. And it's not a very long section, but there are a lot of things to think about in there. So list what you think are explicit requirements. Then gather your existing procedures and processes, including your management system if you have one, and begin to figure out how the requirements of this stack up to what you already have. This document is not intended to undo the very good procedures that you've built through decades of experience. After you've done that, now you have two lists. You have your perception of the requirements, and then you have all the things you do. Then identify gaps and make prioritized steps to close the gap. You can't just go do everything at once, but some things will generate better returns than others. So make that step. And then repeat, back to the PDCA process. Then you're going to do that again. Maybe it's an annual process that review how your perception and your procedures have evolved and what should be next. And in the end, I think the prize will be attained, and not just for individual operators, but for our industry, who I know is very interested in safety. And I'll finish with kind of a status. We started 2 years ago. We had a lot of work, maybe 11 versions, to get to one we put out for public comment and ballot. It did pass the first ballot. There were 3 negative votes. We had 2,000 comments. And under the API ANSI process, you have to resolve every single comment, either accept it, disagree, or implement partially. And then you have to document in your process how you did that. And so we went through, no, it was 1,000 comments, 1,000. It seemed like 2,000. So 1,000 comments. And I think it was almost exactly 1,000. And then we went back out with another version for ballot again. We wanted to achieve unanimous agreement under the voting stakeholder group. We got another 200 comments. And in this case, we were able to handle them. It passed successfully. In fact, we ended up with a unanimous approval of the document. Took a lot of work. But we are now in the final administrative steps for API and ANSI review of our process, and I expect it to be a published RP in May, Peter? End of May. So watch for it with great anticipation. You can certainly have the draft. I don't expect it to change. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the day.
Great. Thank you, Ron. I think, every time I listen to Ron speak, he always says things that make me ask questions. I don't know. I didn't see too many of you writing down questions. I already have my list. So make sure you keep those in mind, because there's a lot of things we need to discuss. He put a lot of concepts out there. For those of you that are not very exposed to SMS, or at least what's contained in 1173, you're going to be given an opportunity to ask the tough questions. You're going to have the crew up here, so it's kind of like stump the chump kind of thing, This group's worked on it over 2 years. This will be your opportunity. Huh?
Is that
No, chump. Stump the chump. And I'll be in that group too, so I'm not just pointing a finger. Our next set of speakers will be talking about leadership and management commitment and stakeholder engagement. Nick Stavropoulos, who I have no idea how you snuck in. I was watching those doors with an eagle eye. You came through the back? Wow. Nick Stavropoulos, who is the Executive VP for PG&E Gas Operations, and Scott Collier, who is the VP for Performance Assurance with Buckeye Partners, will be speaking on leadership and management commitment. And Stacy Gerard, who was my former boss at one time, also a long time ago, and left PHMSA as the Chief Safety Officer, but on this committee she represented the public. And I'll tell you, Stacy is tenacious. Ron mentioned she represented the public. She is very capable at representing what the public wants, and she stood her ground on several issues, so compliments to Stacy. So I will pull up the presentation, and do you guys want to come on up?
Good morning, everyone. Scott Collier with Buckeye Partners. On my screen, this is a real pretty blue. Your screen, it's kind of a pretty purple, but that's okay. I like purple anyway. We're here, Nick and myself are going to take you through the first element in not a great lot of detail because we're not going to read the document for you. You can do that. We're really here to kind of stress the important items that we saw and the team saw when we placed this particular element first. Ron has already given you, some background of why we did that, but we do want to expand upon that somewhat. First, it's no secret that this is element one. Ron mentioned that, from his perspective and the team's perspective, what a key to it is to have top management and your management in all levels really committed to this implementation of the pipeline safety management system. Our experience through talking with other industries, aviation, chemical, others, tells us that without such a commitment, you will have a very difficult time with implementing a pipeline safety management system. And you will have a even tougher time trying to get to the prize that Ron talked about, because we're all after improved pipeline safety. So when we talk about this first element, please pay a lot of attention to the particular items in that section that we're asking leadership and top management to do. So it is key. It's a key to achieving the desired results. There again, the prize is pipeline safety performance. If you read down through the NTSB report from the Marshall incident, there was a particular notation in that we wanted to bring out to you, and I thank Stacy for also keeping that on the forefront of my mind. But the rupture and prolonged release were made possible by pervasive organizational failure. And if you think about all the things that happened in that incident, we're not going to review those here, but NTSB in their investigation really pointed towards how there were many pieces that went into that incident, where if you had a more intentional and routine processes, probably that incident could have been avoided, or at least been minimized. And so our point through all our team discussions was, if the leadership isn't committed, but if the leadership is committed, you will address those organizational failures, because it gives you the intentional and routine processes to make sure that you're elevating risk and you're managing risk appropriately, and you're checking and you're doing and you're rechecking in the improvement cycle. So, I mean, you're going to see a couple of these terms throughout the document, and it's leadership, top management, and management. So we wanted to kind of, from our perspective, to make sure we're all very clear as to what that means, because we had lots of discussion with it on our team, and we've honed in on these kind of important points. Establishes clear vision that is translated in policies and objectives. That's what leadership is. They're very clear in their vision, and they're very clear on where you want to head your organization. It shares the vision. It's not something that stays within a top management group. That's not what the safety management system's all about. It has to permeate through all your leaders, down through your management, down to your employees. It provides information and knowledge and methods. It's great to have an aspirational vision, but you need to put it in practice. And you need to put it in practice at all levels. And it coordinates and balances all those competing interests that we have, as top leaders in our organizations, whether it's resources, whether it's the next big project, or whether it's the next acquisition. We've all been there. But top leadership really coordinates all those activities to make sure we're not doing things that would impede our pipeline safety performance. So what is top management? It's pretty simple, actually. It's a person or group of people who direct and control the organization at the very highest level. We didn't want to specify whether it's a CEO or an executive vice president or a president. That's up for you to decide. You all should know who your top management is. But that is a requirement as part of the SMS, is to make sure those people that are responsible are defined and have clear roles and responsibilities that Nick's going to take you through here in a minute. And then what's management? Basically, management is the people that implement the vision, right? They're the ones down that kind of put the SMS into an implementation stage. So they have the responsibility in the organization to make sure this pipeline safety management system is executed in accordance with the standard and accountable for compliance. And accountability is really key here, because all of us that have those line accountabilities need to make sure that our employees are moving in the direction that we believe is correct to improve pipeline safety performance. So with that, that's basically those items. Just keep that in your mind as you're reading through the standard. Nick's going to take you down through kind of the expectations for the various categories.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everybody. So regarding expectations, I think one of the things that we do real well in our industry is explaining the what and the how. The what and the how. And we've got a lot of examples of rules and regulations regarding the what and the how. But I think when it comes to top management, and particularly as it relates to SMS, I think our job is to more clearly explain the why. Why is it important to understand what assets we own and operate? Why is it important to understand the condition of those assets? Why is it important to have records so that we can more clearly understand what we need to do relating to those assets? So when you think about expectations at all levels, it's not just top management. It's not just the management team. It's not just the first line supervisor, but all of us have that obligation to explain why we are doing the task that we're asked to do. So it begins with top management communicating and articulating expectations. Top management is really good at getting organizations to do what they want. So it's very, very important that in addition to financial goals and customer satisfaction goals, you have to think very hard about those safety goals that you are going to incorporate so that you can have policies and procedures and a line-of-sight support structure that's going to meet those expectations. That has to start at the very top of organizations. You need to clearly articulate the roles and responsibilities that everyone has in the organization. You know, some of us call it the RACI chart, right? But a lot of times when things happen, an unexpected event, and you peel back the onion around the root cause, the contributing causes, many times it's this, right? That's what the NTSB is talking about when they talk about organizational failure. Lack of clear roles and responsibilities and accountability. That's the responsibility of the top management in the organization. As Ron indicated, the intentionality of making sure that that happens. Ron touched on this, and this is a critically important part of this document. A part of the document that we really wrestled with and worked through as a team. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it in another segment in a bit. But safety culture is a critically important part of what top management's responsibilities are all about. And I think when I look at all the aspects of this document, the one that I'm most proud of, that our team was able to pull together and articulate, it's this section on safety culture. Because when we look at organizations in these industries that Scott spoke about, airlines, chemical, railroads, and others, when you look at those companies that are the best from a safety perspective of what they do, they've nailed this safety culture. And when you talk to them, they'll be the first to tell you, yeah, we think we're pretty good, but we're never done. We're constantly improving, striving to get better, because new people come into the organization. You make an acquisition that you bolt on to your operation. You need to work hard to make sure that they have the safety culture that you want to have permeate throughout your organization. So that safety culture really begins with the two-way dialogue, right? Everybody talks about communication. And I like to think back to what my dad said, you know, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them in that proportion. And I think a lot of times, as senior leaders in organizations, and leaders at all levels really, we don't practice that as much as we should. And this is what we're saying regarding two-way communication. Yeah, it's articulating goals, expectations, the whys, the what and the how, but it's also making sure that we put in place a structure so that we have the opportunity to listen to people at all levels. Do we have a corrective action process in place that people feel that they can report incidents? Do you have a culture where individuals at all levels feel that they have stop work authority on safety or quality incidents? Are they properly trained to exercise that stop work authority? That's all part of safety culture. So it starts at the top, it cascades down to all levels of management, right down to that first line supervisor, that crew leader in your organizations. And a key part of that is the second bullet, as to make sure that everyone in the organization has a clear line of sight. Do the people in the organization all know how they contribute to its success? And success here is around safety. Does the welder, does the mechanic, does the integrity management expert understand how they fit in and how their role has a clear line of sight into the success of the organization? I bet you they do around profitability. I bet you they do around meeting customer expectations. But do they have that same clear understanding of the role they play in meeting your safety expectations? Ron spoke about the intentionality around risk management. It can't be something that you do when you get around to it. This is where the rubber meets the road. To understand the condition of our assets and to make sure that we are deploying the mitigations to address the risks that those assets face. In order to do that effectively, you have to do that with intentionality. You have to do that with rigor. And you need to make sure that the management within the organization, the people who are rolling up the sleeves every day, have processes in place to follow that and complete that with the quality that you expect. We talked an awful lot as a team around data integrity. You need to know what you're dealing with, and that begins with the data. And as Ron indicated, you know, a lot of these assets go back over many years. A lot of the records are not as good as we would like. So one of our first obligations is to understand what we don't know. And when we don't know, what are we going to do about it? But what we can do is to make sure that when we do work today, when we build assets today, that that data and information is properly obtained, and that we share that information across the organization. Is another part of management, so that we're not operating in silos. And finally, it's very important that the management team has in place a rigorous, continuous, scheduled, sustainable process that's constantly looking at the expectations set out in this RP to properly evaluate the organization's status around where it stands in terms of achieving its long-term goals, in trying to make sure that you meet all of the expectations of this standard. So in summary, it's not just the what and the how, but it's the why. It's the why we are doing this for safety. Now I'll ask Stacy to come up and talk about public engagement.
Good morning. Good morning. That was pretty good. I'm Stacy Gerard, and there was some debate when I was put on the team about whether I could be the public representative. And like Linda, last night, I too had a dream. True story, I dreamt that when I got here, I found out that you guys decided that there were better public representatives, and you had them do my segment. And I really wanted to do this segment. I found out in my dream. So Ron alluded to, and I think maybe Nick did as well, that we were very deliberate about where we positioned stakeholder engagement in this standard. I think that one way or another, we have all learned something that we didn't seem to used to know, that engaging with the stakeholders is critical to achieving your safety goals. And we were very deliberate about using the word engagement. We've done awareness. Awareness is good. We want awareness. But we've come to believe that stakeholders, internal and external, have something to contribute to safety. They're in a lot of different places. In addition to that, they have something to contribute to safety, and perhaps something they might know or think about how you're going about what you're doing. When bad things happen, as they inevitably do, the stakeholder who has been engaged has thought about your rationale and has some sense of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so when bad things happen, the engaged stakeholder is in a position to say, no, I understand. They have a ways to go, but they're doing something, and they have a rational reason for doing something. And we need more people who are thinking like that. We were very careful in our consideration of what we wanted stakeholders to be able to do. And we specifically called that out as risk identification and management to contribute to that, and safety performance. It's a constructive role. Ron honestly said, there are people who just don't like pipelines. We think of stakeholders as people who have a role to play that's constructive and positive and thoughtful. So it's a second element. And as far as I'm concerned, that's really important, that it's the second element, properly sandwiched between leadership and risk management. And I wasn't the only one who thought that. It was amazing. This team has been forged by fire. So who is a stakeholder? This definition takes on a lot more granularity about who is a stakeholder. This is our definition. And I would say this is an area where, while we've looked at so many other industry standards, and so many of them were wonderful to learn from, I think our action in this standard maybe goes beyond what any other standard that we've seen did in this area. Person or organization, internal and external, who participates in or benefits from these processes that we have been talking about, established to implement and execute an effective PSMS, who participates in, that's a smaller group, who benefits from, that's a pretty big group. We had some debate about, was it a plan, was it a process? I stuck the sword in the ground and said it's a plan and a process. And after hearing a presentation that Marathon Pipeline gave a couple years ago at the Pipeline Safety Trust, I was very influenced by how they approached this process. I consider what they did was mapping it out. We don't actually use the word map, but we thought about it like mapping out the process. Who are these people who influence and can benefit? Who and where within the organization is there someone or someones who are responsible for engaging with them? What benefit do you get out of the relationship, and where within your organization should that benefit or information or data or perspective be channeled for action? Knowing the exchange of information occurs within the operations of the company, not just within the communications department or the strategic planning department, you want to encourage this exchange every day on a daily basis, and then maybe more proactively than you may be doing it through events, media. We have a lot more ways than we used to have dialogue with stakeholders. What should the process address? This is where what's in this document really goes beyond, and I think you really have to give it thought. It's a high-level view of your operations. What are you focusing on? We talk about the journey and the maturity model. As I see it, it's being able to explain your rationale. You have chosen to do what you do in a priority order over time, over years. It's a challenge. It's a lot of miles. Regulation and your own thinking has led you to take risk management actions in a particular order. You want to be able, at a high level, to explain that. Why? I don't think we've ever said this before. It certainly goes beyond API 1172. It certainly goes beyond anything in Part 192 or 195. And what are the measures that you use to know you're successful? What are those metrics at a high level? It's more of an opening of the kimono than we have said is necessary to be done. This information needs to come back in and be funneled to wherever it is in the company, the control room, field operations, wherever, that you're going to benefit from. And it should be tracked. I was really struck in the dialogue in the team about how hard Ron was pushing the specifics of the tracking. This document gets pretty specific, more in that area than any. The need to really keep track, systematize, check, report, the line of sight. Things just can't get lost in segments somewhere of the company. It's a safety management system for a reason. We talk about the two kinds of stakeholders, and you know, I used to think about, I confess, I thought of stakeholders externally. And I learned kind of the hard way about the importance of the internal stakeholder. It was a learning process. So act intentionally. You know, this team has a language. We didn't compare notes on our slides until we got here, really, or last night. Act intentionally to know that your employees and contractors, it's the whole house. The chairman of the NTSB at the time the recommendation was made to do this, publicly in hearings talked about the whole house. That's outside the company, but connected to every action and every bit of knowledge about the basis for decisions. Everybody has to understand the policies and the objectives and the thresholds, what's relevant to making it work and how it helps the PSMS. There's a cheering on process that we talk about in leadership. It's really the heart of this document, to be able to get the people inside the company to feel comfortable that they own their asset, that their responsibility for pointing out ways it could be done better, the way a process may not be right, the way the equipment may not fit them. They have to feel comfortable knowing that the leadership welcomes them coming forward, needs them to come forward, is going to put a very high value on what they bring forward, and recognize it and appreciate it and do something about it and communicate about it. It's the difference between where we've been and where we're going to get to zero. All that body of information that exists, that rests out throughout the organization, has to be able to move and come forward and go up and come back down. And this is what builds the trust and the culture that Masood is going to talk about as our safety culture champion next. I'm very specific when I use the word encourage owning. Owning, because in companies, so often when you talk about the safety metrics, it's about personnel safety, so important. But the am I my brother's keeper question has to be also put with the am I my infrastructure's brother? Am I watching out for what I'm responsible for and owning that risk and making sure something gets done about it? The external stakeholders, well, you can imagine how wide the population of them are. I think it got a lot, they got a lot wider by the article that appeared yesterday. There's a lot of people who need to benefit from knowing that you have this system, that you're doing all this work, that you're making the infrastructure stronger, and there's no avenue that you should overlook to get that word out to people. You have to be out there and make it easy to be acquainted and to maintain the relationship, the dialogue, the two-way, and to intentionally identify, who are your champions in the company for being accessible and out there throughout the organization, yourself, your team, your leadership team, to address the concerns, and specifically to be able to say, you're having trouble finding information out about our company, we want to be more transparent. So I hope that you will come to accept these principles as ones that you need to grow into. We didn't grow into them in a day or a month as a team. It took us a couple years to get to this place. And we accept the fact that it will take a while for you to wrap your arms around this and say, okay, it's time to go further than we've gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. You know, one thing that struck me as I was listening to, well, basically all three of them talk, Nick and Scott, they're talking about leadership and management commitment. I'm thinking about, you know, if I had a way to see into everybody's thoughts, you know, here and on the webcast, how many people are saying, oh, we're already there. We're already doing that. How many people are saying, you know, we got some improvement, but we're pretty good. And how many people are saying, oh, gee, we've got a lot to move on. Those are the kind of questions that, as leaders, and there are many leaders in this room, you need to think about. The other thing that was touched upon is leadership occurs at all levels. So whether you are the CEO of a company or whether you're the frontline employee, you have a responsibility for some of the safety culture and leadership in those areas. The other thing that Stacy was mentioned, she mentioned a particular article that came out this week. And we see a lot of media about when incidents occur. You know, and I ask myself, why do we only see articles about pipelines or oil and gas industry when bad things happen? And should that be telling us, when we think about stakeholder engagement, maybe people don't care, but maybe it's a mirror we need to think about, how we engage with others and with various stakeholders. Our next speakers are going to be Breanne Metzger-Doran. Is that how did I say it right? Did I butcher it? And Mark Harith. Breanne, I believe, when I pulled this off an old email, you were the general manager at the Operational Performance Assurance with Spectre Energy. And Mark is he's a director with Blacksmith Group, which is PPIC. And I believe they're going to give their presentations down there. So. Oh, not, I got to switch the slides. Give me just a second. By the way, while I'm switching the slides, maybe I don't have it up yet. Hang on a second. I do want to say thank you to the organizations that provided the coffee. I believe the AGA did. So you guys ignore this. My computer. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Here we go. There we go. Thank you. By the way, thank you to AGA that provided the coffee, sponsored the coffee in the back of the room. So, and I don't know whoever else may have done that as well. Go.
Good morning. Almost as well as with Stacy, but you've always responded better to Stacy. No. Brian and I are going to talk about risk management and operational controls this morning. We'll start off with risk management. What's interesting is that you'll see there's a lot of interweaving between these different elements. You've probably heard the term risk management 3 or 4 times already, and it's because there's a lot of interrelationship between these elements. We've excerpted 2 key pieces out of the risk management portion of the document, and I'm going to hit on a couple of key points, is that really you need to have a procedure in place for the performance of risk management. So how risk management is conducted, it's really driven off of procedures. And if you think about where most of you in this room are today, if you have an integrity management program in place, you've got a platform to build off of. And for those of you that have taken it further than that, we'll talk about that as a little bit as we both go through this, that's the foundation to start with. And the second point is really to analyze risk, considering the occurrence of threats, both things that you have in your sites today, but to reach out to employees, those internal stakeholders, to get their input, And as Ron talked about and got us to see very clearly, it's this concept of revealing risk. It's people in the organization identifying but revealing, making sure that it rises up in the organization and that leadership and top management want to see it and want to hear about it. It's the idea of using predictive controls, monitoring, and mitigation measures. With respect to implementation, we identified a number of key points here. Certainly there's a need to think about what can go wrong, to be thinking, even at the employee level, to have employees help to think about what can go wrong. They're close to equipment, they're close to the assets every day and day in and out, day out. So for them to be able to see and understand where the risks might be and to help reveal and raise those is really, really important. I think Nick pointed out that one of the key things that all of this work, but it's extremely important in risk management, is starting with good data. And then knowing where your vulnerabilities are. Where do we not know or have a complete picture of the assets that we have in the ground? And building that into your risk management process, dealing with that in terms of uncertainty. The idea of risk mitigation. How do we mitigate risk? Again, this is another platform to build off in existing integrity management programs. You've already got preventative and mitigative measures built into those programs. How do we take that and make it more whole house? How do we take it to the rest of the asset base and apply that same kind of thinking? And with this idea of intentionality, the idea of doing things periodically on a schedule, I think Ron talked about that and made it very clear, is intentionally review the risk on a periodic basis. And that we left up to operators. We set a minimum of annual, but that really, you know, there's an intentionality that needs to be there. The real key is reporting to top management on that periodic basis, making sure that they're aware of the risks. We saw the value, and I think most of you see the value in prioritization today. Certainly as you evolve risk management systems or processes, there's the opportunity to better inform the budgeting process. As we saw among many of our members and we saw among peer operating groups and other industries, as they have begun to take risk management and help it drive communication to senior executives and to the board. And sometimes that's done through risk registers is one way that that's done. We point out another resource here, which we do throughout the document, actually in the bibliography in the back as well, is other resources to look at. There's an ISO standard on risk management, which serves as another place to take the existing platform that you have today in integrity management and look and do a gap analysis with, for example, with this ISO 31000. You know, are there things that we can build off of and improve in that context? Yep.
So before we move on to operational controls, just one thing to add on risk. One of the things that we really wanted to stress is the idea of going beyond the physical threats that a lot of us have in our IM programs and really thinking about the risk of a process breakdown, the risk of untrained personnel, the data-related risks, and documenting and having mitigative plans for those as well. We really wanted this to be beyond just corrosion or the typical kind of physical threats that a lot of us think about when we do risk mitigation, but really this is intended to be sort of that whole, more holistic approach. And some of those risks may be more qualitative, and they may be harder to put numbers on, but that's really a key element of looking at your overall system. And if you look at some of the major incidents that have happened over the last few years, a lot of them were due as much to process breakdowns or gaps in personnel or not following procedures or things like that as they were due to actual physical risks on the assets. So that's a key component of what this element is about as well. And then if we want to talk, the next element then is the operational controls, which is a general broad term. It's used in a lot of management systems to convey a whole host of ways to control a risk. Can be procedures, can be physical controls, a whole number of things. In this document, we really have tried to focus on kind of the 4 areas that we thought were, we wanted to emphasize around operational controls. The first, of course, is procedures. Everybody has procedures. Everybody probably thinks they have too many procedures, and it's very hard to proceduralize every single thing. But we wanted to make sure that there's an emphasis on all phases of operation here. So this is initial startup, normal operations, temporary operations, emergency operations, and shutdowns, normal shutdowns, restart following maintenance or an outage. It's really intended to be, do you actually have procedures that cover the whole gamut of how you may operate, not just normal operations, because that's someplace that we do sometimes see a gap within operations. And they also need to be reviewed at least annually as a requirement in the standard. It's something that we debated quite a bit about what kind of frequency should we put on that. I think more important than the frequency is the idea that that should not be a check the box exercise. I think a lot of us have annual reviews of our procedures. We read through it and, okay, yep, looks good. But are we really testing that people are actually following the procedures, that they're actually practical and feasible? If you look at some of the incidents that have happened, it turns out people hadn't been following an SOP for 10 years. And you go back and look at it and then said, well, it didn't really work and it wasn't really feasible. But yet, for 10 years, an annual review had been checked off on that particular procedure. So that's why that is a requirement here as well. The second is the system integrity, which is really trying to take a more life cycle view. So this is everything from design, construction, operation, even we included all the way up through abandonment of pipes, and ensure that all of the right processes are in place for quality control and management of the whole system life cycle. The next is the management of change, and I'll talk a little more about that in a second. But one of the things on MOC, we really debated, should we call out MOC separately in the document, or is that just another procedure that people should have included? And we debated that quite a bit in the group. And one of the reasons that we did make MOC a standalone section is we felt that, one, it's just very important, and there's a lot of really important opportunities to address changes and make sure that things are properly managed and risks are mitigated in change. And two, to be very honest, that's something that the pipeline industry has struggled with. For those who come from more of the process industry and refining and things like that, it's much more second nature. For a lot of pipeline operators, MOC is a bit of a challenge, and even though it's been part of things like B31.8S for a while, a lot of folks still struggle with that. So we wanted to really put an emphasis on management of change and also really clarify that MOC includes not just physical changes, but procedural changes, organizational changes, all of those other types of changes as well should be in scope of the MOC. And then finally, the fourth area we wanted to emphasize was contractors. Like a lot of other industries, we all tend to use more and more contractors than we did 20 years ago, and we typically also use them for a lot of the high-risk type of activities. And so the communication and clarity with contractors becomes even all that much more important as we move forward. And Mark's going to talk a bit more about implementation around contractors.
I think the first point here is that this is an area that was highly emphasized in the NTSB recommendations. When we had opportunities to meet with staff as well as some of the members over the past several years, this whole area of contracting and working with contractors. And as Stacy pointed out, Chairman Hersman used the phrase or the context of the whole house in the Enbridge Marshall, Michigan hearing. She talked about how critical it was to have the communication and data exchange between contractor and the owner-operator. And so one of the things we've done is to really put some emphasis on the communication and the importance of that communication. It's also communicating internally in the company what the roles and responsibilities are of each person in the operating company to work with the contractor, so that that's very clear in the whole process. So it's defining that responsibility, accountability, and authority. It's incorporating the work and the findings of what the contractors do and making sure that it works its way into all processes in the company. So today, that might be taking ILI runs and making sure that they work their way into the integrity program. As you look beyond, it's what data did they find in the field that they can improve the records that we have with respect to the pipe, the environment, the soil around the pipe. Can we improve the data we're starting with in risk management? So it's going beyond just those simple one-on-one tasks today. the key of training and orientation on safety policies. It goes without saying probably, but we wanted to make sure there was, again, that emphasis that, you know, it's important to have an emphasis on contractor safety just as you have on your own employee safety. It's evaluating contractor safety performance, so it's not just getting the job done, it's looking back at the job, doing job debriefs. How can we work together better? How can we better exchange information? How can we communicate during the execution of processes to make ourselves more effective? And it's you know, communicating risks at the work site. So when there's something that's identified that's not in a plan, that's not anticipated, raising those concerns, stopping work if necessary. I think some of the healthiest discussions we had in our group was this concept of having authority to stop work. And even in that context, still using procedures to manage how that work was stopped and how to address the circumstances that exist once work has stopped. Very healthy discussions, and I think you'll see that reflected well in the document. And again, communicating the MOC process, procedure, how it works, and implementing it.
And so just to add a bit more on the implementation of MOC as we think about how to implement an MOC program. Of course, a lot of folks have start with what we have, and I think you heard that earlier with Ron's comments about most companies have a number of these pieces, and so we're not advocating starting over, it's building on what you have. So a lot of us already have MOC processes on our integrity management program, so building with that. And focusing on this, you know, as a starting point on the significant changes. You know, if you take a MOC to the extreme, you could have to, you know, do an MOC on we're going to change the coffee or things like that. You really need to focus on the significant changes first and hit the biggest risks. The second thing that we've learned is consider developing a tiered approach that's more of a risk-based approach. Perhaps for a significant change like reversal of flow in a pipe, you may need to do a very comprehensive, detailed management of change. But for something else, maybe a more minor sort of quick and dirty MOC is sufficient. And the companies that we've seen that have done this well have often used more of a tiered approach. And usually that's risk-based. And then also one thing is to assign a dedicated resource. There's a lot of just administrative activity within MOC of making sure all the right signatures are in there, all the right forms are filled out, things like that. Where we've seen it really struggle is when it just becomes something else on someone's to-do list. But having a dedicated resource, not even necessarily full-time, but someone who's focused on the process seems to make a big difference in the actual execution and ensuring that the MOCs actually get signed off on before the change takes place. I think we've all seen examples where there was great intent to do a MOC process, but the change went ahead and happened, and not everyone had actually signed off. And we've seen some unfortunate incidents as a result. And then finally, make sure that there is tracking and closing of the actions. You know, one thing that Stacey pointed out that Ron had emphasized is, again, the tracking and making sure that things are actually completed. We're great at completing audit findings and things like that, but making sure that all of the actions associated with the management of change are completed and closed, particularly things that may need to happen after the change takes place, is a really key element of this. And so there's a number of those that we wanted to emphasize as ways to improve the implementation of trying to meet this requirement in the RP. Mark, did you have anything else you want to add on that? So then I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. So we are at the point that we get to take a break, a 20-minute break. Please be back at 9:45. Also, I would encourage you again to keep track of those questions, because these people you see up here will be back up again for the Q&A session. So thank you much. Enjoy some coffee and cookies, and we'll see you here at 9:45.